Hello, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo, and I would like to share with you our book, which is called Ubuntu Bulamu and the Law, and an extra textual aid statutory interpretation tool. In this book, we discuss what some people would argue and say African jurisprudence. You could consider it more like a renaissance of Africanism, if you like, in terms of jurisprudence, because we make argument in terms of what was African, what was taken away from us, and what is relevant in terms of the things that we need to understand in as far as African jurisprudence is concerned. I would like to begin by reading for you something very small that may be necessary in terms of understanding where I'm coming from in terms of this argument. This book is premised on the argument called Vox Populi, Vox Dei, meaning the voice of the people is the voice of God. But listen, Lord Macklin, when he was addressing the British Parliament way back on 2nd Feb 1835, said the following things: I have traveled across the length and the breadth of Africa and have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth have I seen in this country, such moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think that would ever conquer this country unless we break the backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual and cultural heritage. And therefore, I propose that we replace our old and ancient education system, her culture. For if the African think that what is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation. Incredible. Think about this. This was said way back in 1835. No wonder we came about with these arguments of the Inception Clause, the Order in Council, and then the argument of trying to bring in their law and making it part of our law. Those of you who are doing constitutional law, you probably haven't heard of cases like Ara versus Amkeo, Rex versus Amkeo, but thank God for other cases like Mufimi 1 and Mufimi 2, which have actually changed jurisprudence. But the important thing that I'd like to argue in this book is trying to talk about the going back, finding our roots of sorts in terms of African jurisprudence. Because my argument is that the law that we have is actually grafted or founded upon a foreign legacy, perhaps even our education system. So in this argument, my proposition is in terms of trying to rediscover ourselves in terms of African jurisprudence. So perhaps you have heard of things like Matoput, Gacaca, Matoput in the north, of course, Gacaca in Rwanda, things like Ubuntu in South Africa, things like Maranga, I think in Malawi, Bullsback perhaps in Germany. We have Ubuntu Blamu in every way. I think it was Bishop Desmond Tutu who was the greatest advocate in terms of Ubuntu Bulamu, and even Dr. King, Reverend Martin Luther King, who made that for whatever reason I can never be what I am until you are what you are. So the argument that we are inextricably bound and whatever affects you definitely affects me. But the argument is in terms of Ubuntu Bulamu, is in terms of an application of our African jurisprudence in terms of the things that were, what people were calling bad law. Because the argument was anything that is null, repugnant would be null and void to the extent of its repugnancy. The question is, what's the standard of measuring the repugnancy? So in this book, I make all those arguments in terms of the standard, in terms of those arguments, in terms of what is necessary, and in terms of the law as it ought to be. I think it was Reverend Bishop Kamanya Lubogo who made and said that Ubuntu is actually a torch of the law. So perhaps we need to argue this in terms of the new jurisprudence. I believe every law school in this country should actually embrace this book in terms of jurisprudence, because in this book we're going to argue the Africanism or the African Renaissance in terms of rediscovering our position in terms of the law. Because any nation, by the way, which is not premised on the ideologies that are innate within themselves, will lose their identity and therefore will begin thriving and depending on other ideologies or colonial masters for that pace. I mean, every country perhaps that has made a mark in this world, beginning from America, beginning from England, beginning from Russia, beginning from China, all those, even India, have actually grafted or developed their laws and ideals in terms of those customs and traditions that are innate within them. And this argument that ours is bad, the idea that ours is not right, ours is demonic or black is bad, is I think something that was propounded by people who never actually wanted to appreciate the Africanism in terms of the ideologies and the giftings that God has actually dawned upon our black nation. So in this book, I make those arguments in terms of trying to rediscover Africa, rediscover ourselves, rediscover the ideals that are important. I'll give you an example, for example, of what was happening in America when they actually took your brothers and sisters as slaves. I think it was Henry Lynch. The word lynch actually came from a man who was diabolical in terms of treating the black slaves, your brothers and sisters. Incredibly, even the first ship that actually got the black people from the shores of Africa was actually called Jesus. Think about that. So they brought tradition, they brought religion in terms of propounding their ideologies, and they were, exported in the Caribbean and other nations. And Henry Lynch had these diabolical ways of trying to subject Africans or black people in terms of becoming servants. For a long time, for over perhaps 300 years, the black people in America were actually considered to be 3/4 of a human being. Think about all those arguments. So this ideology of white supremacy, this ideology of demonizing the black people and the black identity is something that I think has been stereotyped on us, forgetting that we are gifted, even as good as any other person. By the way, civilization, if you argue, actually began in Africa. I mean, all these things of ancient Egypt and stuff like that, all those arguments were actually Africans in one sense or the other. So Henry Lynch was actually given this ideology of trying to change the mindset of an African. And he said the only way you're going to make an African believe in you forever, they said, get a black nigger, like they used to call us, tie one leg and the other leg on a horse, and tie the hand and the other leg on another horse facing opposite direction, set fire amongst their private parts, and beat them to an inch of life. Let the horses tear them into 2 pieces. Do this before the female niggers and the children, and set dogs on their private parts, on their breasts, so that these people will forever put the fear of God in them, so that they can be forever dependent upon them. His argument was, take the mind, leave the body. My argument today is to bring back your righteous mind. Your argument is that it's this ideology that if you want to hide something from a black person, put it in a book. That is something that we're going to fight as Africans. And I think it was one gentleman who said that the world has made being black a crime. I intend to make it a virtue. So we must change that. We must change that in terms of African jurisprudence. We have to discover our roots. And I'm not being black supremacist in sense, but I'm trying to be revolutionary in terms of African jurisprudence. So this book will bring us that aspect of African jurisprudence in terms of ubuntu and the law. Get it, my friend, and God bless you for your attention.